coming to you from Moon Hills. After giving her this bit of advice, the prince smiled at her and stepped backwards into his other dimension as she had seen him do so many times. Having much to think about, Shiloh went back to her flower and snuggled into it to sort out what had just happened. She felt curious about the prince's last remark. She also noticed that she felt very different, lighter, happier than she had felt in a very long time. Suddenly she felt tired, as if realizing how heavy the load was that she had carried for many years. The burden was gone, and it was time to rest. With a smile on her face, she drifted off to sleep. Chapter 6. The next morning dawned with a brilliant blue sky and sunshine. As she lay sleepily coming to consciousness, she remembered what had happened the day before, and the prince's last words before he had left her. Excitedly, she jumped from her flower and ran to the spot where the prince had buried the ashes of her shame. There, sprouting from the dirt that the prince had pressed down the day before, was a small tree, covered in beautiful purple flowers, and wafting from the tree towards her was the most beautiful fragrance she had ever smelled. Inhaling deeply, she found herself invigorated by an overwhelming sense of the king's love for her, and the prince's delight in her, and the knowledge that she was a deeply treasured creation of theirs. She sensed their confidence in her ability to help with the prince's project, an ability that they had planted within her from her very beginning. For a moment she felt their eyes upon her, watching with delight and anticipation of what she would do next. Where is it?
Right there.
Can it see me?
Oh, the phone? It's right here.
Oh.
Yeah, it can see you.
Okay. Such happiness welled over her, like a wave in the ocean, that she did a few cartwheels and handsprings, then sat down in the grass, smiling and breathing heavily. Then she jumped up and flew off to find her friend. "Naomi, Naomi," Shiloh called excitedly when she found Naomi sleeping in a big pile of leaves with Gecko by her side. Opening her eyes, Naomi smiled at her friend's enthusiasm, even though she had no idea what it was about. "What is it?" she said, sitting up. "I have something to show you," Shiloh said. "I will carry you, if that's okay." "Sure," Naomi replied, lifting up her arms a little so that Shiloh could get a hold of her. Slipping her arms under her friend's underarms so that her friend's weight was supported in the palm of her arms, Shiloh said to Gecko, "You can come too if you want." Springing to his feet, Gecko trotted along under and behind Shiloh and Naomi as they flew, following their shadow as it moved swiftly and smoothly along the dirt path. Talking as if she were an excited tour guide, Shiloh took Naomi for a low-flying aerial tour of all the ice sculptures that she had been working on for the last few months. Shiloh told Naomi about her encounter with the prince when he had commissioned her to do the ice art for him, explaining his purpose for the work and how sad he was that his forest dwellers didn't come to him for help. After the tour was over, they dropped down to sit with Gecko and Chameleon, who had joined them during the tour. Then Shiloh told them all about the prince setting her free from her shame, and she took them to see the beautiful flowering tree that had sprung from the planted ashes. Finally, Shiloh ran out of words, and Naomi, whose head was spinning somewhat with all the new information and the new way of seeing the prince that Shiloh had showed her, said, "Okay, I think I get it. Will you help me ask the prince for help?" "Of course," Shiloh responded, delighted. So Shiloh and Naomi stood with their arms around each other and called to the prince. Right in front of them, the prince stepped out of his other dimension. With a delighted smile, he said, "What can I do for you two?" Shiloh looked at Naomi, and Naomi told her tale of woe to the prince, ending with, "And Shiloh told me and showed me that you want to help me." "Yes, I do," the prince replied. Opening his shirt a little, the prince reached one hand inside. The girls could see that the streak that should have been a scar from where the dragon had clawed him so long ago still oozed blood. With his hand, the prince wiped the scarlet streak so that as he drew out his hand, some blood remained on it. Gently he reached out and touched Naomi's forehead with the blood-smeared hand, holding his hand to her forehead for a moment. Naomi could feel the poison of the black mold being sucked right out of her body and into the blood on the prince's hand. When the poison had completely left her body, the prince withdrew his hand, and they could see that the red blood had turned a grimy blackish gray. Again the prince dug a hole in the dirt at their feet with his heel. Into this hole he flung the grimy blood, burying it with his hands. "You should check on this spot in the morning," the prince advised them with a mysterious smile. Then he stepped backwards into the other dimension. After the prince left, Shiloh looked over at her friend and saw that her wings had been restored to their original color and shape. No sign of wilting remained, and they looked stronger and healthier than ever. "Look, you can fly again," Shiloh shouted with delight. Naomi tried her best to look, but since the wings were behind her, she turned to look unsuccessfully, like a dog chasing his tail. Shiloh burst into giggles, followed by Naomi. They laughed so hard that they had to sit down. Then they stood up and grasped each other's hands, and jumped into the air, fluttering and twirling and laughing with delight. Chameleon and Gecko looked on, smiling. The next morning they all went to the spot where the prince had buried the mingled blood and poison. During the night a golden tree had sprung up from the place, whose leaves glowed with a soft golden glow. Standing there looking on in awe, they felt an overwhelming sense of the awesome power of the king and the prince, and their great love for them and desire to help them. So began a long and happy life for Shiloh, of sharing with others through her art how much the prince and the king cared for them, and delighted in helping them. Of course she made ice pictures of the prince pulling the worm out of her, blasting the worm with his eyes, and the beautiful tree that grew from the ashes. Also she made pictures telling Naomi's story from beginning to end. Her art became better, and told the stories of the prince's love and power more and more fully as time passed. She shared her art and its message with all she came in contact with who needed it. Many forest dwellers learned to receive the prince's loving help through the gift that the prince had given her. Chapter 7. After many years, Shiloh felt old and tired. She just didn't have the energy and enthusiasm to produce much art anymore. One day the prince, suddenly and for no apparent reason, stepped out of his other dimension in front of her. Smiling at her and looking into her eyes, he took her hand and led her to where he had come from, and they both stepped into his other dimension together. The first thing Shiloh noticed was that she suddenly felt young and energetic again. The other dimension was a forest similar to the one she had always lived in, but with much brighter colors and more pleasant smells, sights, and sounds. But she didn't have much time for that, because the prince jumped into the air, still holding her hand, and they flew up into the treetops. Popping up over the tops of all the trees, they came to a large golden floor, resting on the treetops, which they flew up to and landed on. Now Shiloh could see that there was a beautiful golden wall, encrusted with colorful jewels, sitting on the golden floor. As they passed through a gate that was covered with pearls, Shiloh caught her breath at the beautiful sight before her. Golden streets were surrounded by colorful houses, and a sparkling river ran along beside the main street. Beautiful fruit trees were everywhere, sending the most tantalizing smells throughout the whole place. Beside her, the prince walked slowly, allowing her to take in the sights and smells all around them. He seemed to be enjoying seeing his home as if for the first time through her eyes. Eventually they entered the palace where the king sat, surrounded by an emerald glow, in his golden throne, which sat on a sapphire platform. The king stood up to meet them, embracing them both with delighted smiles. "The prince has told me about the wonderful work you have been doing for us for many years," the king said to Shiloh. "Thank you so much." "It was my pleasure, of course," Shiloh replied a little bashfully. Turning to the prince, she said, "Thank you for all your help. I could never have done it without you." "Of course that was my pleasure, as you well know," the prince replied, smiling. After a thoughtful and happy pause for all of them, the prince said, "And now it is time for your reward. If you will come with me, I will give you the grand tour." Shiloh, having long forgotten about the promised reward for her work, because she had been working wholly out of love and gratefulness to the prince all this time, now felt curious and a little excited. Leaving the bright palace behind, the prince took Shiloh to a nearby place where there was a large and colorful house with a purple roof. "This is your house," he said simply. In the center of the large courtyard that surrounded the house was a beautiful fountain through which flowed the same sparkling water she had seen earlier in the river. As she came closer, she could see that on the bottom of the large fountain was a colorful mosaic. Looking more closely at the mosaic, she saw that it memorialized the ice sculptures that she had made for the prince throughout her lifetime. "Oh," she breathed, entranced by the beauty of the picture, and amazed that such a beautiful work of art would portray the humble and ordinary life that she had led. "I'm so glad you like it," the prince said as he stood by her side, also looking through the water at the lovely picture. "I love it," she responded. "I could stare at it all day." Laughing, the prince said, "We will let that be the work of another day. Today I have more to show you." Reluctantly, Shiloh tore her eyes away from the sparkling water and the lovely picture below it. But looking around, she discovered glorious beauty on every side. Growing in her own courtyard were lovely fruit trees, with fruits she had never seen before peeking out from between the vivid green leaves, tantalizing both in colors and fragrance. In the door of the large house was a window made of colored glass arranged like a flower. Walking inside, she noticed that the floor was covered with something thick and soft and clean and perfectly delightful to her feet. Beautiful colors swirled and danced upon its surface. Inside the house, there were soft, clean, and beautiful things to sit on and to lay on. There was also a room containing all kinds of foods that she had never seen before. Sitting down, the prince invited her to sit and taste the new and delightful foods before her. Everything was utterly delicious. Time passed quickly and unnoticed as they ate and talked and enjoyed each other's company. After a while, the prince said that it was time for her to enjoy some well-earned rest, and that there would be more to see after that. Quietly he slipped out the door, while Shiloh laid down on a soft purple bed in the room with all the soft things to sit and lay on. Much later, the prince returned and found Shiloh feeling more rested and content than she had ever thought possible. Taking her to another room that she had not even noticed before, the prince showed her all kinds of new art forms that she had never even dreamed of in her wildest imaginations. There were easels and paints, clay, cloth materials, yarn and thread, glass, beads, gems, and all kinds of other things that she had never seen before. The prince showed her how to dip a brush in paint and create a colorful picture on the canvas on the easel. Shiloh was delighted to be able to create art in full color, which she had never done before. The prince showed her how to make clothes and jewelry and stained glass art. Finally, he showed her how to shape the clay into pretty shapes and how to paint the shapes after they were dry. Delighted beyond measure, Shiloh felt as if a whole new world had been opened up to her and then given to her as a present. One by one, her friends joined her in the king's city, including Chameleon and Gecko, and so she lived happily ever after.